Not good weather this November, but not terrible. Well, you know, it's hard to tell which is worse, poor or severe. They're both bad. The Germans managed to punch a little bit of a hole right in here. Not enough that they could exploit too much, but in doing so, they managed to kill themselves, the Soviet Union. Drop its will a little bit. That's always good. Italy got knocked out of Gabas. I'm never sure how to pronounce things. Germans marching up towards Egypt. It's beginning to look pretty ugly there. I did also the Allied turn here. I haven't done the Soviets yet. I'll be taking a break, which is... and the biggest thing here was I looked up and no, it doesn't help the Allies at all to be in Norway. I thought it did. It's definitely important to the Soviets, but it doesn't mean a difference for any of the Allied stuff. So I've got to wait until I get my bombers. And then I can start hurting the German production a little bit more. I thought having air power over there, air cover over there would help at least ushering the Murmansk convoy and would kind of factor into that. And it doesn't seem to be in there at all. So that's okay. Let's see. So I tried sending the Mediterranean fleet to supply itself. And it got hit a couple of times by these Italian planes. That really wasn't a worthwhile task for the Italians in a sense. This fleet isn't really doing any damage to anyone. Bombing it up kind of, gave me some positive feeling. But that's about it, to tell you the truth. It's not terribly effective to... if this were a supply convoy that I was relying on here, but I'm still relying on this one for the land units, I just decided, let's let that fleet supply itself. Well, I bombed it, and now it's in worse shape and is less likely to be able to escort a convoy if this falls. But as you can see, it didn't fall, and there's as much threat from the Germans as the Turks. So I think Egypt's just going to collapse there. Not a whole hell of a lot else. You know what I ought to do? With the Germans, I should have brought this forward. I guess it's not a big deal. It's not like air power is going to do anything this turn, and I'm keeping him kind of out of the range. Part of it's because I'm not being consistent here, in terms of keeping the sorties on top. I want them on top where there's fighting, but I don't terribly want them on top elsewhere, and it confuses things probably. We got some British and Italian tanks that I forgot to put on the turn record from probably the duel over here. Alright, we'll see if the Soviets can do anything too exciting. And as we push into December, not a lot of change. I did go back and fix something with the Brits. I forgot this guy here, so I shipped him in. That cost me some more sorties. I've actually been repairing some of these. Didn't have a lot of points. I have enough points to kind of catch up, so it's not so terrible looking. The only thing that's going to be a problem is if I sail through here. I forgot to pay off my Italians. I've got to buy up their stuff, as I realize. Over on the Soviet front, not a lot happened. Nothing down here for the Turks. Here there was some attritional attacks. The only real effect was one of these units, one of these German units got damaged. I think maybe this guy. Nah, couldn't have been him. I don't know. May have been him, may have been him. Somebody in kind of a stupid location or stupid looking location. But, there was a little bit of leeway that I left in the German budget, so that was no real effect at all. We're just not seeing any movement there. The winter is just it's preventing anything impressive from happening. Maybe as we start seeing these shock armies and the motorized upgrades coming in more and more. We've got another one. I think I put them here. That'll make it more likely to be able to punch a hole in something. The fact that the Russians have 3 tank assets available, and the only place they've been able to use them is on the Turkish border. I couldn't manage anything successful there. Basically, there's a choice between really poor odds multiple attacks and being able to use all the tanks, which is kind of appealing because I don't like not using something. But I went with an assault, which was, I'm not willing to crunch the numbers, but it seemed a little bit more likely to actually succeed. So at least that was my feeling. I think that's about it, except for paying off those Italians. Turn started off very, very nicely for the Axis. In terms of, they took Suez, and that's going to change the dynamics of the economic warfare. They also ran and took Alexandria, forcing the fleet back here, so there's no hope of these guys supplying themselves unless they can fight their way out of this trap right now. And that looks pretty hard. Over on the Russian front, also some good news, but that came late. The early thing was a massive assault on this piece using the paratroopers. They survived, luckily. I thought I had a guaranteed kill there, trying to, get some kind of willpower there. I forgot to put the U.S. will up before this. It's only 10. Which basically means if the U.S. starts taking too many casualties, they have a collapse. I don't think they can surrender, if I recall correctly. But, that throws their whole army into disarray, knocking everything down a step, basically, which can be a pain in the ass to recover from. Probably take a turn or two. Well, it'll take one turn because they have infinite money, so they can rebuild everything in supply, right? It also causes problems, though, to their naval and air assets, where they're, I think, destroyed from it. So that'll take much more time to rebuild and are very important to them. Some other attacks by the Germans were not as hopeful, but one was this continuous attack I've been making on Rostov. It finally succeeded, and that takes a factory and a couple of national will from the Russians. Now, I don't expect to knock the national will down for the Russians, and I'm not sure I really want to. If it gets anywhere close, the Russians might start disengaging from me in the hope that I knock them out, because if I do, they get all their territory back to the occupied territory. Of course, in terms of winning the game, that may not be the greatest thing either, though, because they end up knocked out for, I don't know, a year or whatever, which a year's respite for the Germans to focus entirely on England, probably enough to knock the English out. But it looks like the English are in a lot of trouble down here. Now, their national will's a little bit better. They're up at 15, but they've got things they can lose on the board other than just their units. Supply is getting a little painful for the Italians. Their convoy's up to 6. I might have to swap this other convoy in just to be able to keep my armies in operation. There's no easy way to get supply other than maybe through Gibraltar, because no, there's still no rail link there. No, there's no easy way except through Russia, which could happen. That Rostov move is important because it does open up the possibility of this front. But more important to me right now is taking Iraq so that I can move to Kuwait and keep putting the pressure on the English. I hope I should Kuwait there. I know that sometimes I don't look at the camera where I'm pointing it. Attacked by the Brits. Now they cut up here with their garrison to cut supply off for the German unit. That's going to make life a little tougher on him. He can still get limited supply off Ankara, and if next turn. If things don't clear up by then. But anyway, the Brits managed to launch an attack here, threw their armor into play, got a kind of lucky roll, would have forced the Turks out, but the Turks got nowhere to retreat, so they just take a stealth loss instead, and the Brits are just hosed by that. me not thinking clearly enough about the fact they weren't going to be able to get out of there. There wasn't much I could do, though. The assault was the best attack I could make. I did not have enough movement points because I was here in a zone. I couldn't run right down to here, so I had to come out and over and attack, and it just used up so many movement points. I didn't have room for a second attack, which I would have liked to have done. Ended up using up my armor on that. I can try to break my way through down here in the Tunisia area, but I mean, and I will, but it looks like the Egyptian troops are pretty much bagged there. In the Western Allied turn, you can see, well, you know, we're marked with the low supply markers. I sailed my ships out up to Portsmouth, or Plymouth, sorry. Right? Yeah. They can reach there from Cyprus, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, not quite. I forgot the straits cost additional. What are they, 2, I think? Yeah. So, let's just do a landing here at Casablanca. And, you know, I'm going to start moving back in order to be able to send them. Well, I can't have them at Gibraltar. In order to be able to use them somewhere. No longer really a positioning in the Med there outside of trying to bottle things up at Gibraltar. Over here in sort of the Tunisia area, we did punch through the Italians. And I started thinking about, geez, I could bomb the Italians, do airstrikes against the Italian ships. I guess, and that brought to mind, hey, why would the Germans be fighting, you know, British airplanes in Britain in particular, other than to prevent them from suppressing them? This is beyond the why is it an issue. But yeah, you could bomb the shit out of their naval capacity if that's not properly protected. So there is some reason to be launching attacks against Britain. And so there's something worth defending here beyond just the airplanes themselves. You really don't want to engage in air-to-air combat if you're at a disadvantage, unless, you know, you've got the kind of situation like the Russians are going to have here, where, hey, the numbers are such that we're going to be trading 1 for 1 because of the severe weather, this, that, and the other. And speaking of which, I think we're on to the Soviets. Another hex gained here on the Turkish border. The Russian advances, what little there were. They were in this area, kind of cutting off this thing. Probably weakened their position more than it strengthened it. It made it so that I had to shift forces down over here to fill in the gap, make sure the area that I advanced from is in supply. Otherwise, this unit came from back here. You had to jump across. Not a lot of success, and what success there is probably weakened my line. The bonus, though, is I'm getting more units on the line. I'll be able to take one of them and throw it into one of these holes, like here, perhaps up here, here. I can't put it right up against the Germans, but this is looking kind of weak too, down in the area that I lost in Rostov. But I wanted to actually talk about something kind of clever that I decided to start doing. I've been getting kind of tired of swapping these 6 sorties and 4 sorties back and forth as the air duel keeps going on, and it's just pretty much a mechanical aspect to the game. Well, instead I've shortened my task a little bit by just throwing the 6s on top of the 4s for this, so the Germans are going to buy these guys back for $9. Let's see what else they have to buy. As we push into 1942, we get a couple of new things on the board. Available. The Western Allies have their own partisans, which I can use to help decrease the strategic warfare aspect. I don't know. They can also be used as a die roll bonus, but much more interesting for that is the free forces, which, well, they're not as interesting as the partisans. They can only be used as a die roll modifier in combat, but I can throw them in any Western attack, even in territories like Libya. They count as, the Poles and Free French and such that were fighting in conjunction with the Commonwealth and eventually the U.S. forces. So that's, neat little extra modifying counters. They also, though, have the Germans have their subs back. They got their surface action back after they did the interception there. They have a ground support. That's useful for the Turks, of course. We have some interesting possibilities starting to open up as the Russians begin to field more and more forces. The attraction of opening the front up into Latvia is starting to become more of a factor. I still don't quite have enough troops to spread the front, especially as the Germans have kind of weakened me pushing up against here. But at some point, I do want to extend it out there. It looks like I have a few more troops than the Germans. It may be about parity right now. But I will eventually have more troops. And I do want to do that, not just in order to extend the front, but also once I attack Latvia, I get Latvia's production. This is the only way that I can get these productions. I'll never get Lithuania's because I lost them. That was something I had to clarify with Sal. I mean, it's what the rules seem to imply, but it seemed a little funny to me, just well, hell, how come if I just invaded, I get it, and if I do that, he gave an explanation. I think it's more of a balance thing than anything else, though, to give you some hard choices than any real clear, in the midst of the war, we'd be able to integrate Latvia into the economy at all. I don't know. Certainly the Germans it's reasonable to say the Germans are able to integrate some of the Polish and some of the Alsace-Lorraine factories in, but it comes online right away, which is one of the kind of iffy things there. Anyway, the game doesn't try to go into all that much detail. There are some abstractions in it that are saying, well, this is going to speak for a lot of that development that's going on and whatever. It may not give you quite the exact lever you expect to be pulling to get something to happen, but it's along the right lines overall. All right. New Year brings pretty crappy weather. Strategic warfare. The Germans decided to use their subs against the Soviets, and that played out well. They're building up a nice factory loss count on the Soviets, which is why they did that. They've got a lot of bonuses against the Western Allies, +3 right now. 2 for Brest and Bray, and 1 for Suez, and also the hope of getting Kuwait and really hurting the West with that. The Western Allies threw their partisans in against the Germans, though, which have the German die roll. It didn't do anything good for them, though. They ended up taking a factory loss of their own. It's a hard choice for the Germans to go against the Soviets in terms of the supplies, for the simple fact that the important role is usually this one here, especially if the Germans are already at their minimum. But with all the modifiers in their favor, they liked the odds of being able to continue to slow down the Soviet production. And in the long run, well, it doesn't really matter either way, to tell you the truth. Soviets haven't been using all their production. Allies haven't been using all their production. I probably should have been protecting mine instead. But you never know. Alright, started out as a very nice turn for the Axis operations. First of all, successfully beating up the English down in Cairo, and it was the Turks who did it, but the Germans provided a first attack that helped, knocking out the WDF into the dead pile. That should have probably been just disbanded. It was out of supply. I could do that. These garrisons don't hurt me to lose, but I lost a national will by allowing the WDF to be killed down there. I lost another one for losing Cairo, and I lost some factory, though. Got some interesting ideas here involving an Italian fleet coming down and transporting the Turks around let's see, to the Arabian Sea and then down to Kuwait to attack that, so I don't have to actually cut through Iraq. There's very little gain for me taking Iraq. The only problem with that is I'll have to figure out something to maintain there. It would be more advantageous maybe if I got an Italian unit down there to do it, because if I got a garrison down there, well, he's still not going to be in partial supply now. There's no really pleasant way to attack Kuwait, but I could get a quicker hit on it by swinging around navally, and that might be worthwhile, but I still think I have to go through Iraq to succeed here. And the bonus with Iraq, I also get a German national will, which is kind of cool if I can get that off of kind of cheap stuff like Turks. Well, and the stupid armor that I really want to get up against the Russians there. However, well, let's keep going before we talk about the however. On the Russian front, real across-the-board assaults by the Germans. And they gained me some ground up here, cutting through in here, some damage. Most of this was already in place. But I did get a little bit of extension to my front, or a little bit of advance to my front. So this was probably not terribly cheap. You can see I only have 11 left. I don't have enough to rebuild all 4 of my air units, and that would cost me 12. So I may have overdone it, actually. I gave the Turks a point during the economic phase because I know they have to rebuild this unit. It's very unlikely the English are going to be able to take that space, but if they do, they can reestablish supply through that convoy down there. So that weak Turkish unit is somewhat problematic, but if the Brits can't take Suez, this garrison's dead as well. Of course, if I had disbanded the WDF, the Brits would be knocked out of Egypt pretty much assuredly, although I think it's pretty certain anyway. All right, now to the ugly stuff. The Italians now have to face the RAF down here, and the Italian air fought it a little bit. That didn't work terribly well. Then when I tried to trace supply, and I was only trying to trace it once for this one Italian unit, I was going to take the low supply on the Panzers anyway. But I managed to get to 6 sorties on the convoy after the fleet was knocked out of the attack. Several rounds of combat, because you can intercept several times with something like a supply line. It's only an invasion that you can't. So instead of launching my planes out of Malta, I'm launching them out of Gabes. But same effect. I'm really interdicting the Italian supply. And that's not good, because that means the BEF is going to probably be able to get Tripoli, and that means I probably can't go on some sort of adventurism through Iraq. I'm going to have to cope with whatever the Allies are throwing there, and that's just causing me issues. Now I can turn these guys, but we are going into I got a lot more to do, into the Allied phase. We can see if they can do cool stuff. I expect this North African front to just continue to escalate, and it looks like it's really positive right now, but once U.S. troops start coming in and flowing into there, it's going to be really problematic. For the Western Allies, the Italians actually played a very, very impressive withdrawal game. They ended up finally getting damaged, and I'm not going to be able to recoup that. There's a white bar on units that are considered reduced, including the garrisons. Kind of helpful to remember that. And the Brits were not able to overrun Tripoli. And again, that's probably not sufficient to save my bacon down there, but it does give me a little bit more time to react to the BEF's operations. Meanwhile, the British are drawing supply from Algiers here. Now, that's coming through Area 17. If the Italians reposition themselves to, say, Sardinia, they can interfere with that. So that's something to keep in mind. There's no real reason the Brits have to be here, but that's where they are, so it causes some trouble. Of course, I've got another fleet down here. I have to actually pay. I paid these guys, but I don't think I paid these guys off. It's cheaper if I use the convoy there. And then this guy's doomed, and I sailed into the Indian Ocean. May have attacked too many times with him anyway. I seem to think he should only have his half movement allowance, and I think I attacked at least twice there. Shouldn't have been allowed. Alrighty, on to the Ruskies. As we push our way into February, the Western Allies are doing a pretty good job of getting most of their units repaired. And they have a lot of money and not a lot of units. These slide into my pool. You can see I'm going to get some more planes into play. Likewise, the Soviets are getting more planes. And we got our partisans and everything that we can throw in. We can only use one on economic warfare, so we'll probably do that and keep one for fighting with. I didn't bother to use one for fighting, which I probably should have. One thing that's becoming kind of problematic, though, I wasn't able to repair everything, this shock infantry. I didn't have the points for everything. But as these things, as the regular infantry are upgrading to these mobile infantry, they cost twice as much to use. Now, that's not going to be a problem if Lend-Lease starts cranking its way up. But with my low amount of factories, even with the Urals factories on the line, it's kind of hard to come up with the income. In the historical situation, Russia would have been pressured in the same sort of way with a lot of the territory taken. So actually, we've got less Russian territory at this point, but it seems to be hard to find the money to both conduct the offensives and upgrade my unit. Well, not the upgrades, but repair the units that get damaged, especially the air power. And it's just going to probably get worse. We're only in 42 here. As 42 slides onward, we're going to have some real problem because the German armor, etc., is going to come into play. Of course, the Russians have their armor too. They don't have any tanks on the board, but they have these kind of flexible tank units. The Germans only have one, which allow them to pick the battles that they want armor to be present in. But they only get that for one die roll for each tank unit that they expend, whereas a German panzer can go charging through, let's see, it's going to cost me at least 2 points to attack a hex. I've got 10 movement points. Up to 5 attacks, though, just rolling down the line. Unlikely you're going to get that many attacks, but you can see you get that big bonus multiple times. Plus, German air is in better shape, and now the Russians are going to have the added expense of another air unit to throw in. They've got a lot of material that they've got to fund, and not a whole hell of a lot of income to do it with. We're not in the days where we were getting $32, I'll tell you that. We're at, what, 5, 4, 3, 2, 11, 12, 13, 26 now. And that's about what the Germans are pulling, looks like 28 recently. That goes down to 14. So the Allies have a lot of money, obviously, but their tools are expensive. They have a lot of naval operations that they have to undertake. Although, now that I'm not having to support this anymore. And here's another factor. I've got to garrison Suez, because without that garrisoned with something, Allied units can show up in the Western Indian. I can throw a surprise attack down here and launch an invasion there. That's actually a reason why I can't send that Italian invasion around to Kuwait, because if I do that, I end up with the problem of having to spend $20 on that surprise attack. I don't have that paid for. It'll take me 4 months to get. So that's not going to happen. Okay, after the economic phase, both of the Allied forces used their partisans, got some delays there, to cut the German strategic warfare down, and actually they were successful in reducing their own factory losses. They managed to keep Germany they didn't manage to raise Germany's though. Now we come to kind of an interesting position that I'm thinking, and this explains my strategic move here in the North Africa territory. So the BEF can't just go running through here. The reason being, Tunis I can bypass because of this little road here. So I can get supplies from Algiers. Algiers is the closest place that I can get supplies from without having to deal with a possibility of being intercepted by the Italian Navy up there. So unless I start directly fighting the Italians, I'm going to have trouble pushing the Brits further eastward here. This unit here, and I'm going to get another one here eventually, is important because Iraq, A, only has 1 unit, and B, has a national will of 2, and it has 2 cities, and it can't defend 2 cities with 1 unit. So if I get, say, the tank here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or the infantry here, 1, 2, 3, I will be able to cause the fall of Iraq without even having to fight a battle. And that's pretty good. From there, of course, I can push on to grab Kuwait. Likewise, if I had the naval invasion, I could cause the fall of Iraq that way as well. But I can't really get in there without spending far more production than I'd like. Anyway, that's my thinking along those lines, which gives the Axis sort of an advantage until I can establish a presence in the Mediterranean that really dominates the Italians. Now, I have more navies for the Brits, but I kind of need to keep the home fleet here, because if I commit that down to the Med, the Germans could slip in and do a lot of damage. They have superiority in the air power here because I committed a plane down into North Africa and a number of other things. So it would be very dangerous for me to push this attack too hard. I do have a slight naval edge though, because I'm the Brits. I have Force H here. I have my Med fleet. I have to worry about keeping supplies in place, but I might be able to outduel the Italians in the long run. In that interim, though, I think I'm going to lose Kuwait. Of course, I do have the U.S. fleet still, and I can slip that into place and help. I had been keeping that over in the United States to help shift troops over. At the very least, the fleet can move into play, but I'd have to supply that. I had thought, oh geez, I'll just control this roadway. Well, I got to be a little bit more careful than that. Another interview for me coming up, and I'm tense as hell. Have to play because time scheduling ended up making me think it was an hour earlier. And, anyway, started with the German in Axis here. And I think I did everything I intended to. Basically a bunch of attacks here that were somewhat successful along the southern front because the weather cleared up a little bit so tanks and airplanes can play. Well, I have air superiority but not massive air superiority. So I was able to get a little bit of advances in some of these areas. You can see here Not really able to dig this unit out. It's not quite isolated, but I managed some isolated attacks. You can see the Yugoslavs even spearheaded an attack that actually killed a unit. They didn't really spearhead it. I've got opportunities for other attacks, but I don't want to make them. After moving my armored unit here, which is now in supply, and we took care of that on purpose, I only have a couple extra points left to spread around. I could make, one more attack with that, but if the Soviets attack and do some damage, I'll have to repair that. So I want to save my points for that. Otherwise, everything's kind of committed to rebuilding the air points all to 4, which is a pace that I think the Soviets can keep up with their 3 air units, but they probably can't afford to build this one too and keep that whole pace going. So they're going to have to make some harder choices than I'm having to in this front. We did manage to kill 2 more units, I think, including a shock army, and there go a couple more willpower. I don't expect that to run down the clock on that thing, but it is actually moving at a pretty good pace, given that this is winter. I've already dropped it 5 points, right? Over here in the west, I exchanged my boats. Moved the damaged unit here. Moved these in here. That was after suppressing the Allied air, which would have been able to interdict. And now I feel like I've got enough of a blockage there to prevent the BEF from being able to punch its way through Libya easily, so I can afford to start moving my panzers. This is still going to be a kind of long process. I probably have to use my strategic move to get it here. I'm allowed to drive on these roads because there's nothing in my way. I haven't captured that territory, but auxiliary forces have done so, essentially. And that'll put me in the position to take Iraq, guaranteed. What do you want to defend? I don't know. I don't care. You make your choice. If you defend Baghdad, you probably slow me down on my way to Kuwait, rather than just because the Turks are slower. On the other hand, I might force them to defend Mosul next turn, and yeah, I don't know how much help that does, but I don't know how much harm it does either. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I could make some ground in there. I don't know. Anyway, what I'm looking at is making that attack successful. This will give me the opportunity to rebuild the Italian infantry here, and well, I was able to keep everything I really wanted in supply. And I guess that'll push us over into the Allied operations, and I need to take the last few preps for my current interview. Okay, so the Western Allies here are just doing my Navy support or supplies. Have pushed through Tripoli successfully, ignoring the fact that the Germans seemed to think that they couldn't do this. They decided, hey, if I put a Navy unit here, after having taken this, I drove the Italian fleet down to Egypt, actually. And I got enough firepower here that I think I could just keep pushing on. I don't have to worry. I'm not going to see an invasion back here anytime soon. What the hell? And that's going to kind of put some pressure on. The Italians lost a city that was only worth 1 will, but they also lost a unit, which is a second one. And I didn't think they'd keep pushing on, but yes, they are. Elsewhere, I'm just making sure everything else is in good shape. Still got the U.S. fleets that I'm holding in reserve. I'm not sending them forward. I don't feel like I need them yet, and I'd like to use them for transporting units and maybe kind of shuffling British units into safer, better places to recuperate for their own transports. And now we go on to the Russians. With poor weather, attacks are very, very difficult. So even the Russians weren't able to get a lot here. I made a little bit of ground somewhere in here using my partisans. I think in this hex I took. And then drove this guy in, tried to hit those Italians. Cut this guy out and isolated him but to no real effect. In other places where I had numerical superiority, someplace like here I couldn't even do an effective attack. Now, I might want to pay to pull this guy back, tighten my line a little bit. The problem is I don't feel like this piece is vulnerable. It's over in here that I feel like I have the vulnerability, and I'll be able to grow new units, although that one is loose. So I could actually, I've already looked at this and didn't like the numbers game on it. I can build, I'm going to be building, what, 2 new units? One's an air unit. I will build that, but that means I don't have as much capability as I thought I would to, say, filling this in. So I think I'm going to spend a point to move him as well. Kind of a little disconcerted here in terms of what I'm doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll put him in place. I'm not going to conduct any attacks with him. It looks like I have this big numerical superiority, but I can only use 3 units maximum on an assault, and I've already calculated that out and said I didn't want to do it. So I guess we move on to checking where there's no supply, which I think is nowhere, and then running the economic stuff. Sad, you know, the cleverness I had at doing this, I forgot all about it and went with full replaces again, so now I've got to swap counters. Just can't teach an old dog new tricks even when the old dog is trying to learn them. What the hell? Oh, this is one of the 2 Western garrison planes. That's... I got to be careful not to fly this out of there. I think I'm allowed to have this here because I'm at war on both fronts. Earlier I would have had to have this on the border. If the Moscow Treaty reappears, fat chance on that, I'd have to fly him a little, or actually drive him, because basically, so here's the thing you might be wondering about. Air units do have to be transported. Now, if you think about airplanes, you would say, well, I could fly a wing in or whatever. Yeah, but what you can't just fly in is all the personnel and easily. Is all the personnel and the such not to build a good base. So at some point or another, you do have to provide some sort of transport. Now, there certainly is air transport available, maybe not so much to the Germans during World War II, but it's of a very limited variety for the amount of men that you have to move around. So again, along with all of the abstractions in the game, I think it's perfectly fine that you're not flying planes, you know, say from Sicily into North Africa. You have to establish that air base. Pushing into March, overall, this is not a good period for the Axis. We're seeing a lot of German tanks and actually a lot of Russian tanks and actually a couple of British tanks beginning to show up into the force pools. So those will be available to be built. No new German tanks, I don't think. Some new German infantry showed up, but the only really interesting thing for the Germans is this heavy artillery. What that's going to work as is a +2 die roll modifier in one combat. Basically, I can toss it in any German combat, I believe. I'd have to look it up to see if it's applicable to other Axis. I don't know. These counters aren't always clear to me. There's nothing on the counter itself that makes it clear to me that I've noticed when it's usable. So the heavy artillery of the same nationality. So that would only be for the Germans. So for example, something like Ultra has the British symbol on it. It's green, it's kind of US colored. What does that mean? Well, I don't think, actually, I think the Western Alliance is that. I think maybe, yeah, I think generalized Axis is going to have this. Generalized pro-Soviet is going to have that. So actually the flags do provide you with a little hint. I just haven't been paying enough attention to internalize that piece of information. But that's very helpful because then you don't have to make as many lookups on that one little piece of information. Hey, who can I use this for, right? I don't think that's clarified in the rules, but I'm not sure it has to be. It's just the kind of thing that when you do start to play a game a little bit more, you realize, yeah, there are some little tools to help me here. And they become important in that sense. But yeah, as weather turns better, you'd think the East Front's going to go a little better here. But the Russians really are actually beginning to get their real troops into play now. Their armor and such not. They've got a fair proportion of their infantry. I wasn't able to build that plane. I didn't have enough economic power. That's, the countries are all kind of running to the limit of their ability. Everybody's down to one or no points left at the end of this. We open up March with varied weather. This is good news for any kind of operation down here in Iraq. That's good weather now, finally. Everything below that's bad. I think the Turks can probably take the Iraqis on, so I declared war. I have a ground support marker. It might help. I just have to take the 1 hex to win it. Of course, there is some defensive bonuses there. There's 2 points of defensive bonuses from the terrain, likely, because I can't maneuver around these dots. If I haven't explained this before, and I don't know that I have, those are impassable for one reason or another. In some cases, it's because the terrain might be usable, but it would allow really a historical concentration. So smaller forces might be able to slip through it, but at the scale of the game, and that's probably the case in Iraq too. Other cases, things like the Qattara Depression, the desert out here. Again, it may be that some small desert raider force could use it, but for the most part, the game is just saying, nothing, no terrain of that type was used by armies, and any kind of light desert raiders that ran through here could be counteracted by other forces that are beneath the scale of the game. In a game like WIF, World in Flames, you end up seeing sometimes smaller units thrown into the game with the right to operate like that, and it actually ends up really causing some problems with that differentiation in scale. This works well the same way, actually, although it doesn't cover territories like this as being impassable. Third Reich more or less catches the same idea. This is just a little bit more explicit about making certain territories just impassable to large armies. There's no road through there anyhow. I mean, you wouldn't have supply. Well, you could make it not to here. You'd be out of supply in this hex, but some of these hexes you would be able to have supply otherwise within the rules. So rather than have armies doing stupid things that make no sense, this is what they went with. I'm pulling more Yugoslav units over to the East Front, trying to fill out the defenses there. My big focus is probably in the Mediterranean at this point still, with the BEF there. Russians, they're not going to be able to crack through that easily, but at least they're putting some pressure on things there. The possibility of Kuwait, etc. We'll see how that all works. Obviously, the game's not going to be won or lost in the Med. It's going to be won or lost probably in the Soviet Union. But the weather's still crappy there. Remember, offensives seem harder in poor weather than in severe weather. Severe weather, you're both affected by it, the attacker and the defender. Poor weather, it's just the attacker who takes the penalty, except for air combat. Of course, you're able to use more of your toys in poor weather, planes and tanks and such. But it hasn't helped too much. We see a little bit of movement last turn. We'll see if it gets better. All right, I'm just delaying because I know I'm going to take a break. Forgot to talk about strategic warfare. Everything evened out, except the Germans are behind one now, actually. They threw a sub in against the Soviets, and then they paid the penalty when the Allies outrolled them, even though they have bonuses against the Allies. But, you know, my figuring was, hey, I really want to gain the leverage on the Soviets. That's the people who have the most capability to really hurt me here. Yeah. Hard to tell, because North Africa is pretty damn important in this game, it seems, in the game I'm playing of it, rather than because of the fall of Egypt, etc. If that can be maintained, it's going to be, I think, fairly devastating on the Allied situation to have to keep throwing troops into North Africa to fight for that. But we'll see. Okay, let's start down in the Near East here. The Turks ended up failing to take Mosul. No big deal there. I've got a German armor preparing to run across to Baghdad, but the Brits are going to be able to land in Kuwait or Basra, more likely. Iraq's going to fall. That's almost guaranteed, but the battle for Kuwait is going to be somewhat contested. The Germans have a huge advantage with that armored unit, but it's busy there when it should be over here facing the BEF, and that's really a problem. I'm able to draw supply from Constantinople safely, actually, so that's kind of cool. But I got this Italian unit here in Sicily. I would love to drop down into Tobruk, for example, and I just can't dare it. Not with Force H fully healthy. I did take out the air unit in order to, you know, maybe clear the way for that. If I'd gotten lucky with that, maybe I would have bombed Malta. But with the fleet there in Malta, there's not a lot I can do. Right? This handles the naval rules, the naval situation in a very elegant sort of way that really feels spot on, actually. All right, let's see where else. Okay, so the Germans, though, had the superiority in the air, an extra unit, basically. And they were able to use that, along with some of their armor advantage and the weakness of the Soviet line in the south, to bust through. They took Kursk, actually, and killed the unit there. And you can see they're kind of crossing the river here. They were hoping to do a little bit more damage. They used their paratroopers to get around and help them attack in Kursk. Up here in the north, they also made a little bit of ground, nothing significant, just some pushing over here, and that allowed them to shorten their line a little bit, actually. They had a kind of dense bulge there. That's been fixed. There's still this bulge. You know, I'm hoping to be able to cut that off. It's strange because I was kind of hoping to cut down and trap these guys down here in Turkey. But just the way things are kind of turning out with how the Soviets have their line built and what units I had where, the advance seems to be thrusting this way. And that'll put it over to the Allied operations, which are getting kind of interesting, especially in the North Africa area. Things are fun there. I don't have my U.S. troops yet, but they're starting to come in. I know I've got some bombers, some British Bomber Command coming into play, and that'll start wreaking some havoc on the German industry as well. Before we go any further, another rule screw up on my part. Warships, they can trace their supply line for free, as long as they do it just themselves. That means, you know, the fleet units, etc., like this. I took the Italian cost for tracing away this turn. I can't revoke everything that I've done. It's probably hurt the Axis more than the Allies in this game. But, you know, I've made screw-ups here and there, everywhere. Anyway, I also got a definite clarification from Sal that the intention, at least, I don't know where the rule is, but so I haven't been able to look it up myself, but the intention is that those limited supply sources only help 2 units at a time. Perhaps he or someone else will give me the rule number for that, but all I can find on it is, let's see, maybe we'll find a specific there. So, yeah, there it is. Just my blindness, so I found it both. Cool. All right. Yeah, I'm really bad at reading rolls, as I'm sure you no doubt have noticed. But you know, that one actually hasn't affected anything yet, although we may be getting close to that, because right now the axis is really relying only on Ankara for supply in this whole segment down here. So it could come to a point where the Turks are fine, they can supply off Turkey, but the rest of the Axis units, this German unit and these two Italians, other than the naval supply, I can only supply 2 units using the limited. Okay, what about the Brits? They stormed up to El Agila and failed, even though they had kind of an armor superiority, were able to attack a couple of times. They still didn't take it. I shipped the WDF back down here. It'll be, I gotta pay supplies for it. Did I? Yes. And the warship has no problem. There was an interception. The Germans had their little surface action thing. First round went poorly. And, you know, I believe they can intercept as many rounds as they like, but it meant I'm at more of a disadvantage, so I just threw them back up on the turn chart. I don't view this as a do or die situation, and I'd rather have my surface action capabilities to prevent some other landing. But yeah, that's another unit coming down. Now I could have shipped the air unit down as well, but then I got to worry about supplying it, and I can't draw supply as far as I can guess. Well, these are limited supply sources at best anyway, and I just don't want to overtax my supply engine, especially since I'm probably going to use strategic movement to shift this up into the front area on the next turn. And then the turn after that, if I bring the planes in, then it's worth paying the extra supply for them. And that puts us over to the Soviets. Let's see if they can try to do anything to save themselves down here in the southern areas. Launched a couple of attacks with the Soviets over here, down here against these Hungarians, and against the Italians here, and I really haven't gotten any traction. I was kind of hoping to cut this guy so that I could, you know, with both these hexes, so that I could maybe throw something in, hit that, or at least kind of undermine the German position. But I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that I don't even want to succeed in any of my attacks. Anything that I could do, I could launch an attack here at, say, 3 units to 1, and I may do some of this down here. So that's not a shock unit, so it doesn't give me any bonus other than just a regular unit. But I'd be attacking at +2 for the extra units, -2 for the poor weather, minus another one, so I'm at -1 against the German +2. I could hurt myself doing that. Now there's no real harm to that because I've got the extra points right now, but let's say let's see if I can do anything good for it. If I'm looking at -1, the best I can do is a 5 to a 3. I can, you know, maybe cause a retreat. Is that worth doing? Is this hex valuable? Yeah, a little bit. So I'll take the shot at it, but it's basically what I'm resorting to is these kind of poor odds attacks. Shock units are a little weird. The modifiers for them take some getting used to, and in particular, they're +1 in fair weather, in addition to their elite status, right? And then on assaults, they count as +2, as do tanks, if you're in fair or poor weather as one of the auxiliary units that you're adding in, instead of just a +1. So you kind of have to look around and try to figure out what you want to do here. So here, this is, no, that's a motorized guard. It's kind of hard to see the shock units for me. Here's a shock. And I was kind of considering this attack. Is that worthwhile? Well, I don't know. Let's see what I'd be attacking at. I'd be attacking at +1, +2, +3. I'd be at +1, so I'd have a chance of actually doing some damage. Right, 7. If I get a good modifier, a good roll, and they get a bad roll, I can actually do a step loss. So that may be the better place to hit, because there's no more Yugoslav production left. They were used enough that the Germans, that the Axis would actually take some damage, and that would carry into next turn. It couldn't be rebuilt. I'm trying to balance these things and figure out what I want to do. As much as I would in an opposed game, I get carried away. I launched too many damn attacks. I didn't have the money to build that other air unit again. I thought I had it calculated right, but I found some Russian units that were buried under other things, and just ended up leaving that sucker in there. And it's kind of getting dangerous now, because I get some armor here to build and everything. I shouldn't be wasting money on attacks that aren't going to get me anything. Trying to push things a little harder down here against the Turks by putting some elite motorized stuff. And the problem is the expense of actually attacking goes up as I get these motorized units and the armor on the board. They're going to be a lot more effective, the armor at least. The motorized, I kind of wish they weren't motorized. I wish they were elite non-motorized units, because I just don't have the surplus. And the Russians actually have all their money. The Allies, well, they should have more money, but they haven't really been running into real problems, although I've got... Uh-oh. That's an upgrade. I wonder what that upgrades. Probably one of these motorized units. I'll have to look that up to see what units get upgraded there, but I think it's got to be the motorized. I hope.